And so I'm really excited to be here. My most favorite thing to talk about, well, after my children and my dogs, honestly, is Inq-ITS. So we're really happy to be here and share with you more information about our platform and tell you a little bit about our traction and our various features. As I mentioned, we're joined by Joey Powell. We're very excited to have him here. And I think we're also joined by Nancy Foote, who's a longstanding partner teacher from Arizona today. So we're going to be talking about Inq-ITS, personalized online labs that score themselves. So first of all, as many of you know, on the last PISA, we scored really poorly, 18th worldwide. And then the next generation science standards attempted to address students' difficulties in science. So there's a move towards, and there has been a move towards, authentic inquiry, forming questions, running experiments to answer these questions, interpret data, do the mathematics associated with the science, warrant claims, and communicate findings. And teachers must also provide instruction of these practices as per the NGSS and do assessment of these. But typical assessments are not well suited. For example, multiple choice assessments can't reflect students' practices required by the new standards, and open response-based assessments like lab reports take too long to grade. And furthermore, we and others have shown that writing is not always an accurate reflection of what students know. So for example, here's a typical classroom, and students are all doing experiments all at their own pace. And here's Billy. Billy here's on the right. He's a science genius who can conduct inquiry really beautifully, but has trouble describing what he knows in words. If the teachers relied on a lab report, this will be a false negative. The other side of the bell curve, if you will, these are just boys by coincidence, is John. And John's a student who can parrot back what he's read or heard, but really doesn't understand deeply how to conduct skilled inquiry. So we've shown that if teachers rely on lab reports, students are misassessed on the practices between 30 to 60% of the time. So I wrote about this in US News and World Report. They picked up this story from me because I think it really speaks to the need to have true performance assessment. So we're getting it from the NGSS as well as other 21st century skill frameworks. And then also we know that these assessments are really not capturing the processes they need to capture. So we have a solution to this problem. Our solution is called Inq-ITS. Inq-ITS are labs for assessment to accompany your science curricula. And so what these are online labs, grades 4 through 10, that are auto-scored with patented AI for in-class or remote use. They assess science practices, including students' claim evidence, reasoning, writing. They offer real-time new reports you're going to see today and alerts for teachers and co-teachers, so paraprofessionals, subs, etc. We offer real-time support for students, including Spanish, and this works on PCs, Macs, Chromebooks, etc. It's a single sign-on, Google Classroom or Clever, and no rostering is required at all. And we were recently ranked the best virtual labs for NGSS by Tech and Learning last fall. So basically, as an overview, before I turn it over to Mike, on your left, you see these virtual labs. Students do inquiry with virtual labs aligned to the next generation science standards. As they work, all their practices are graded using our AI-based algorithms. At the same time, Rex, our virtual tutor on the bottom right, can jump in real time and offer personalized support targeted right at the level the student needs. So we've broken down the inquiry practices of the NGSS into its various constituent parts, and our algorithms are grading, and Rex is jumping in on that basis. At the same time, teachers get real-time reports, real-time alerts, and also tips. Tips are called teacher inquiry practice supports in order to guide instruction and do their writing in real time. So this eliminates subjective time-intensive grading, because we know that labs can take up to 15-20 minutes per student. So we know in terms of efficacy, and based on our published research through Rutgers University, where I'm a professor in the learning sciences, that our algorithms match hand scoring with very high degrees of precision. Rex helps students learn and transfer science practices to new topics, tested up to 180 days. Reports eliminate teachers' time-consuming grading. Alerts identify which students need help for one-to-one differentiated or whole class instruction. This actually has demonstrable transfer to the next inquiry activity. And then we have our tips to guide instruction. We've gotten a lot of kudos for our work. We're very excited to share with you today. And on that note, I'm going to turn it back over to Mike.
Okay.
All right. So let me go here. Analyst. There we go.
Okay. So let me share my screen. Hopefully, can I get a confirmation that everybody sees my screen?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So I'm going to ask you, Janice, if you don't mind, or whoever is monitoring the chat, that if there are any questions that you see, feel free to just step over me and say, Mike, stop, address this. We have this question from the audience, and we should be good to go. I can't see the chat window, unfortunately. I have a full screen here demoing this. Okay, so the way that I like to demo this system is from the inside out. And what I'm going to show you from the lowest level is what a student experience looks like, a single lab. And then we'll sort of build up from there what Inq-ITS is. But in a nutshell, as Janice had told you, they're online labs with the ability to grade what students are doing. And because we can grade what students are doing as they're working, we can provide key benefits to students. And so those will get highlighted along the way in this presentation. But at the lowest level, an individual lab assignment, what does it look like? It usually starts off with a quick introduction, sort of giving the students an overview of what phenomenon they're going to be thinking about or doing that you've assigned to them, right? So in this particular case, it's about phase change. And so they're going to be heating some ice cubes in a beaker and start to talk about what about melting and boiling points and stuff like that. So one particular goal around this investigation is for students to explore this goal. So determine how the amount of ice affects the boiling point of water, right? So this is aligned to a specific content misconception around studying phase change, about the macro aspects of phase change. And what we have students do is we have them go through sort of an investigative process, and there's different kinds of processes, but the one that we're going to highlight here is they're going to start off by forming questions or forming hypotheses, then collecting data, analyzing their data, and then tying it together into a claim, evidence, reasoning write-up. And Rex, Janice had mentioned, Rex, our interactive agent, is active during these activities. So when a student is struggling, Rex will pop in and provide some automated support to help them as they're going along. And so let me highlight that right now. So this goal here says, determine how the amount of ice affects the boiling point of water. So I might say, well, I think that if I increase the boiling point, then the amount of ice will also increase, right? And this is actually an untestable hypothesis because I've mixed and matched my independent and dependent variables. Rex is keen to this, and he's jumping in and he's saying, well, I don't think you can test your hypothesis because you don't have an independent variable as part of your hypothesis. And you can go in a little bit deeper and you can ask Rex for more support. If you make the same kinds of mistakes over and over again, Rex's support will get more and more targeted to help you along. Just for the sake of expediency, I'm going to say, okay, that orienting support, just reminding me, oh yeah, that's right, I forgot I mixed and matched my independent and dependent variables. I'm going to change my variables and I'm going to say, okay, it should be the amount of ice affects the boiling point of water. And now I've got a scientifically testable hypothesis. It might be scientifically inaccurate because we know that, when the amount of ice increases, the boiling point doesn't change at all. But even so, this is a testable hypothesis, and the system will let me move forward. And hopefully through collecting data, I'll be able to identify my misconception and change it. So the next part here is we have students collect data with a simulation, and here students are tasked to try and pick and choose which variables they want to run with the simulation and collect as much data as they think they need that they could use to support or refute their hypothesis. And so typically what happens is an unskilled student might click around for a while. They might just run some random trials. And one of the neat things about that we've done is Rex is actually able to watch behind the scenes And depending on what choices the student is making, what kinds of trials they're running, the number of times they're pressing the button simulations, what choices they're making, if he believes that the student is off track and floundering and not collecting good data following good experimental procedures, he'll jump in and provide some support. So right here, he says, well, I think the data you're collecting won't help you test your hypothesis because you aren't designing a controlled experiment. And while the student might be confused, they might say, well, how do I do that? Well, I could design a controlled experiment by changing only the variable you're testing and keeping all the others the same. Oh yeah, I remember we talked about that in class. So let me try and do that, but I'm going to do it for a different variable than I said I was going to test. I said it was going to be the amount of ice. So let me run in some controlled experiments with the amount of heat and see what happens. As we melt away. Okay. So let's say that I'm done. Well, Rex jumps in and says, okay, great. It looks like you did a good job at designing controlled experiments, but let me remind you to change variables that allow you to test your hypothesis. So he's helping disambiguate and disentangle me when I'm good at designing controlled experiments from when I'm collecting data to test my hypothesis. And this is sort of a hallmark of what our system is able to do. It's measuring how students are performing at these really complicated kinds of skills in very fine-grained ways, and using that information to generate the kind of help and information that a student might need in the moment to help scaffold them through the process and get better at learning how to do these sorts of scientific experimentation procedures and processes.
So Mike, we have a quick question.
Sure.
Helen asked, why do you show unrealistic data with discontinuous changes? So I don't know if, Helen, if you want to dive a little bit deeper in that question. So
Janice, do you want to, I can actually address this a little bit. So depending on the level of difficulty of the nature of the experiments, the data can be a little bit more noisy or not. So we'll have like some idealized stuff, but then we also might introduce noise later in that's a little bit more realistic. And part of the reason is that for the data analysis portion, it can be very challenging for students to see things like trends and no trends in data. If there's not enough noise, or if there's too much noise where something is not always increasing or not always staying the same or something like that. So there's sort of some design implications around having that data that's too noisy for assessment purposes, but also for the difficulty of the experiment. And so this is meant more for like an earlier middle school level, just to start off. Janice, do you want to add anything else to that?
That's fine, Mike. Thank you.
You sure?
No, I'm good.
Okay. But yes, we do have some other simulations too that are actually based on a little bit more real world data, so that you see, for example, one with chemical reactions that has a little bit more of a more naturalistic curve than you would see. Okay, so because Rex has, because I've actually designed controlled experiments pretty well here now at this point, Rex has let me move on. And now the next part here is I need to try and analyze my data. And so what I'm doing is I need to figure out, look at the data that I collect and figure out, is my claim support, is my hypothesis supported or not, and picking and choosing which trials I'm going to use as evidence. So I might say here, well, when I increased the amount of ice, what happened? Well, then the boiling point of water stayed the same. And what happens? Well, did this support or not support my hypothesis? Well, actually, this did not support my hypothesis because I said it would increase, right? Aha, so here's a moment where I'm actually correcting my own original scientific ideas based on the data that I've collected. And here I need to pick and choose which trials I'm using as evidence, and I want to pick those trials which are controlled and actually show the relationship that's found in the data, right? And as you can imagine, this is a pretty complicated task for students, because not only do they have to be able to identify their independent and dependent variables, they need to find the relationship between the variables and understand how the variables relate to each other. They need to also know which evidence count as good evidence, and they also need to know how it ties back to their original hypothesis, right? So this is a pretty complicated task. And again, when students are having particular challenges here, all of those fine-grained assessment aspects are getting mixed together, and Rex is providing the appropriate amount of help at the right time. If there's other more detailed questions too, feel free others in the chat to have a discussion about some more of the finer grain details. That's perfectly fine. So the last part here that we have students do is to re-represent what they have just done in their own words, using a claim evidence reasoning format. And basically, we do this for a few reasons. And, Janice had alluded to one of the reasons beforehand. One is that students who are really good at doing experiments might not be so great at writing, and vice versa. Students who are great at writing might not be great at doing experiments. So you're able to get a handle on those different kinds of students, and we're able to provide you assessment data on who's writing well versus who's doing the science well. Another reason is that being able to communicate your findings is a key aspect of the next generation science standards, right? So you really do want to hone student skills at their ability to communicate. The last reason is that when students are representing what they just did in their own words, it has lasting learning effects. So re-representing what they just did, their knowledge gets reified in their minds, and it becomes a little bit stickier, and it leads to some learning gains that can last weeks or even months later. Janice, you want to add a little bit more to that, or is that fine?
No, I think it's good. Just maybe to highlight one point is that I suppose as the community of teachers and educators, we always knew there were kids who were sort of parroting and they didn't really understand the content deeply. But there's a whole bunch of kids at the other end who can do all this inquiry, but they actually can't describe it in words. And that's highly problematic as well, because you can imagine how frustrating it is for that student who really is having a hard time conveying what they know in words. And this is not atypical in STEM domains. So we're very happy to be able to triangulate our natural language processing algorithms with our performance assessment algorithms to identify these students. And the teacher can walk over and say we'll go back to Billy, I see that you've, created a testable question. You've collected data, you've analyzed your data, you've selected the trials that warrant your claim, but you're having some trouble writing your claim evidence reasoning statement. Let's talk about that. Tell me what you think. Let's look back at your trials, for example, and scaffold that student on the fly. Mike's going to show later our alerting dashboard, which would give teachers some very actionable data and some tips as to how to help students. So that's an example. So I just wanted to add that point.
And to go off of that, we had a question from Brittany House asking if it would be possible if one day for students to submit an audio response instead of a written response.
I think that's available now, is it not, Mike? There's the Chrome
for a student to speak. So if your web browser has a plugin that allows you to do speech to text, that should work. I've never tried it personally, but I think this is a standard text field that people can type into. So if there's a plugin that you have for speech to text, I think that actually should work.
Right. We know that it works the other direction, right?
We certainly know that it works the other direction, where you can actually, if you've got a screen reader, so there's free web browser plugins that you can use where if you highlight the text and right click on it, you can actually have the words read to a student. So for students who are struggling with reading, our system does actually work with those kinds of devices or those kinds of plugins. So just to underscore what Janice had said, that we're grading not only what the students are doing in the science activities, but also their writing. So this claim evidence reasoning aspect, we have developed algorithms under the hood that are scoring their claim evidence reasoning separately, how they write from what they do. Okay. Are there any specific questions about the labs anymore at this point? About some details about like how they give feedback or anything like that?
Do you want to add, Mike, a little bit about the mathematizing that's
I was going to, yes. I was going
Okay.
to after this. I just wanted to pause right here real quick and just, see if there's any questions in the audience or anything like that.
There does not seem to be.
Okay, great. So bumping up a level really quick, what you saw was one particular lab, a specific lab. We have multiple labs across physical life and earth science, and within each lab, they all have these different goals, if you will, different driving questions. And so you can choose to assign, when you assign one of these, you can choose to assign 1 or 3 or 4, as many as you like, and you can reassign them over and over again. But each science topic area comes with, say, we call them lab suites. They come with a package of different driving questions and goals that you can use. And I think we have over 150 experiments available right now that span physical life and earth science. And what Janice had alluded to too is that some of these activities, and we're developing more and more. You saw an example today of, forming questions, collecting data, analyzing, and communicating findings. We have others that also incorporate how students use mathematics that involve more noise and variation in the data. So then in those situations for more advanced students, you'll be, making your questions, collecting data, making a graph with the data, constructing a best fit curve through the data, and describing the mathematical trends that occur between variables, as opposed to just doing a simple increases, decreases. Now you're looking at things like linearity and non-linearity and the relationships between variables, and using some of your graphing skills and mathematical curve skills to address that. And again, like that stuff is auto-scored. Okay, so I'm continuing on with the demo really quickly. As I had said at the beginning of the of my demo, that being able to auto-score students provides multiple facets. So one is that Rex is able to provide personalized support to your students, but another aspect is that we're actually able to capture and track students' growth over time. So all the assessment data gets aggregated and captured and gives you some sense of how students are doing over time. So the more activities that you're giving them, you can see how they're growing at the different science practices. So for example, here, Julian Garcia is, started off okay and having some trouble with analyzing data, bounced around a little bit, but by the end, doing their RAMPS lab, they're scoring pretty well across the board. And so what you're looking to see over time is more dark blue. And so we sort of have this color coding thing, with yellow being needs improvement, light blue on the way, dark blue is doing really well. And so you can kind of capture student growth along the way. You could do this over the year. You can do this by assignment. You can print out students' work. You can see how individual students have answered their, have done the science inquiry stuff. And I actually want to point out, we actually have a couple of new features that are getting implemented right now. Can everybody see my screen? Let me switch.
We also, just so you know, to go over in a quick second, Brittany asked if we sync with Google Classroom.
We do, yes.
So maybe once you're back, you can show her how that.
Yes, I can talk a little bit about that, yes. So we're actually, we currently have a way for you to see what the student labs are and print them out. But what we're adding now, and we're going to be releasing this in about a week or two, is a much more diagnostic, detailed student report that is showing at a glance overall how students did in an assignment that you gave them, but also a detailed score rubric breakdown of how all of the components of the lab are scored. So it sort of helps you understand, the score breakdown, where students are doing well and where they're struggling, but also gives you some sense too of a loose idea of how our algorithms are working and why students' scores are a particular way or not. So this visualization is actually, I seem not to be able to move forward. There we go. So in one visualization for an assignment for a student, you'll be able to see, okay, on the whole, how did my student do, right? And you get a bird's eye glance at how the student did across their science practices and the assignment that you gave them. We also have content pre and post tests that align to the NGSS DCIs, and you can get some scoring information about that. You can get a summary of how much help Rex gave the student, and also how much time a student spent doing the assignment overall. But then you can go down a little bit deeper too, and you can see a rubric and see, okay, well, this is what the student did. This is the hypothesis that they formed, and how is it scored? And in this particular case, I gave a bad example of, making a really bad question that I could not test. And you're able to see not only what students did before Rex Help, but also after Rex Help as well. So you can see how Rex has actually changed what they have done along the way. And just to highlight too, that you can also see, you know, how communicating findings is scored too, right? So how we break down what aspects are being used to grade students' claim, what aspects are being used to grade their evidence and their reasoning as well. And if you need more information, the little question mark next to it, you can click that and pop up and there's more detailed explanation of how this actually works. We're also rolling out too, at a very high level, for each assignment that is done, a one-stop visualization that shows you how all your kids did across the board, across the science practices, what their level of proficiency is, but also next steps. So not only are we grading what they do, we're also going to be providing you what you should focus on next, some key ideas where your students were struggling and when they were doing really well, but steps to take. So how to help your kids get better on their next chance to do science inquiry with Inq-ITS, or just even in the classroom. So it's meant to be more diagnostic. So not only are we giving you the numbers, but also some actionable next steps of what to do to help your students. And it's worth mentioning too that all of the grades are downloadable. You can download all of the stuff and upload them to your favorite grade book and all of that good stuff. And just to show you right now, this is what the student work looks like right now. It's printable, and like I said, what I just demoed for you is the new version of this that's coming out, that's giving you the detailed rubric, which will hopefully be really helpful in helping everybody understand, like, how Inq-ITS is working and doing its magic. Okay.
We had another question. Oh,
yes.
were you just about to ask for questions?
No, I was, yes.
Yeah, so we had another question about, he asked if, can Inq-ITS integrate with any LMS? So
Great
the first
question.
question was, do you sync with Google Classroom? And now it's with any LMS.
So great. I was going to talk about that stuff at the end, but I am happy talking about it right now as well. So yes, we integrate with Google Classroom, but you can also integrate with other LMSs. So we have assignment sharing capability. So whenever you create an assignment in Inq-ITS, there's an invite link that you can share with your students. So you copy this link and you can put it in your favorite LMS. Students can click on it and they can get access to their assignment. But with Google Classroom, we have actually a tighter integration that you can actually assign everything right from an Inq-ITS, and it'll pop up in your Google Classroom classroom.
So Joey, do you use Google Classroom in your district?
We do use Google Classroom, but we also are switching to do the sign-on through Clever, but it'll still be through Google Classroom. And it's been very easy, in case anybody's wondering, like 17 school rollouts, several thousands of children, not a problem.
Awesome.
That's the music to my ears. So in case anybody on the call doesn't know, I'm actually CTO and co-founder. So I not only demo, but I also help build this stuff. So whenever I hear things are working great, like, that's music to my ears. It means I get to sleep. I get to sleep one more night.
Also never had one moment of it not working to my knowledge, or any reason why we could never access it. So in case anybody's wondering.
That's also great.
Brittany also asked another question about the syncing, was, so the final scores in Inq-ITS would show up on Google Classroom if you sign with Google Classroom?
We are building that. So that's a great question. We are building that functionality. We should be rolling that out within the next 6 months. We don't sync with the gradebook just yet, but that will be coming. And actually, Brittany, if offline, if this is something we could talk about with you, we're actually interviewing teachers right now to understand, like, the best ways to do that, and what is the right granularity of data to take from Inq-ITS and put inside of a Google Classroom gradebook. So,
I knew that was coming. I knew the second that you would ask that Mike would be like, okay, well, can we ask you how you would like to see that?
Yeah, that's
because,
because these are the types of, yes, we've definitely heard this before, and we want to make sure we're doing it right.
And Brittany said that would be cool. I would be happy to help.
Thank you. Thank you. And this is, in general, this is how we build out our system, is like, we actually regularly ask teachers for input on the design of our system, where things are working well, where they're not, because that's the only way we're going to get better at what we do, is by, iterating with everybody, right? It's always a work in progress. Okay. Janice, do you want to add anything to the report aspect of this? Otherwise, I'm going to demo Blotter.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that, you could get your entire student a grade book across the entire set of activities, how much rec support they got, broken down at a fairly fine-grained level. So you can really get a bird's eye view of on those scores. And teachers love using the sort of decline or decrease in recs for students in particular who are on IEPs or special ed, because if at the beginning of the year, say a student needs 4 recs hints on every practice, and then by March, they only need 2 recs hints on 2 practices, that decrease in recs help indicates growth. So for students on special ed or on IEPs, it really works well in mapping those trajectories, those longer growth trajectories.
Okay, so switching gears just quickly, the last part of the demo, not only do we have reports that summarize what students have done over time, but we also have a feature called an alerting dashboard that lets you watch what students are doing in real time as they're working. So essentially, this is the crystal ball that lets you see inside of a student's head as they're doing the labs. And so you can track, like, say, 30 kids doing labs in a class at the same time and watch what they're doing. So it tells you not only how they're struggling, but when you click on their name, it tells you who is struggling, but how they're struggling as well. So for example, Hunter Cullington is struggling to graph their data because they don't have an independent variable in their x-axis, right? So it's telling you not just who's struggling, but the diagnostic piece of information. And if you're not quite sure what to say, we also have these tips built in. So if you click on the tips, these are conversation starters that you can have with your students to help them get better at conducting the science practices. And we have all kinds of robust data. We actually have done some really interesting experiments where we triangulated what students did in the labs with what teachers actually said to students and coded their voice data and did some sophisticated analyses to find out what things teachers were saying that were most beneficial for student learning, that were most beneficial for helping students get better at science practices. And we encoded those inside of this application so that you always have available ideas on what to say to help you stay focused on practices and to help students get better at the practices.
Can I pop in for 1 minute,
Sure.
Mike?
Go ahead.
The reason that we did this is that NGSS has been very difficult for teachers to implement with respect to real-time instruction, and teachers were often defaulting to content support. But NGSS is really about the practices of science. So we in fact have a paper, Helen, you might be interested in this. It came out in Journal of Learning Analytics last year by my PhD student Rachel Dickler and myself and Mike, where we actually showed that certain things that teachers said led to increased performance on the next opportunity the student had to do that task. So say if it was designing controlled experiments, on the next task they actually got better. So we then, as Mike said, took those robust nuggets and we put them into the system in the form of tips, and that was funded by the National Science Foundation in a fairly recent grant, and the cyber learning grant that came before it.
And it's also worth mentioning, if a large number of students are struggling with the same kind of skill or the same kind of competency, you'll also get this class-wide alert. And so that's a good time to say, stop the class and have a discussion about how students are struggling with this particular area, and have like maybe a class discussion around it and help them to get better at that aspect.
This is really, I don't know if Nancy's on the call, if she could, I know that she uses Inkblotter extensively. Are you able to say something, Nancy? Are we gonna
Yeah, she's sort of the star. She has probably like it's like the most unfortunate but best story of how Inkblotter can be used. And it's worth mentioning too that this technology, this works both in class and remote settings. So you could be watching students doing homework geographically dispersed wherever you are. If you're all together in the same classroom, this whole system works on any device. So whether asynchronously or synchronously.
So I don't know if Nancy, I sent her, she can't use a microphone as an attendee for some reason.
Yeah, unfortunately.
So, but she did type in the chat that this is probably her favorite part about Inq-ITS. It. It helps my students be successful, and it's so helpful for new teachers.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
Ann.
you. All right, and just to bump this up a level and summarize, so we've packaged all of these three components in the labs, the grade themselves, the reports, and the alerting platform. We package this all together in our online platform. You don't need to install anything. There's no additional plugins that are required. You just log in with a web browser, you create an account, you're good to go. You create and manage your assignments within Inq-ITS. You can share them with Google Classroom. You can use Google credentials to log in. You can use Clever credentials to log in. We have a username and password system that you could use as well. We also have advanced features as well. We have co-teaching that lets a co-teacher assign labs on your behalf. It lets you and a co-teacher use the alerting platform at the same time, so you both could be helping students at the same time and tracking classroom progress. And yeah, able to find search topics by NGSS DCIs, NGSS standards. You can sort by different lab features. We even offer labs we have a couple of labs that are completely in Spanish, but by and large, all of the labs that we have, we actually have Spanish word guides that go with them, which is particularly important to help scaffold English language learners into their understanding of scientific words in English, right, by having this kind of document. Janice, you can talk a little bit more about that as well, about like the importance of using this kind of approach.
Right. We've done a pretty deep analysis of the literature, and what I think the literature is consistent that we want students to become more fluent in articulating what they know in English, because that's the lingua franca of science. And so we chose this approach to providing glossaries. And we have a very talented teacher who is an ELL specialist for science and math who's doing our translation. And we're really, really excited about the work that she's done for us in creating these glossaries. And they're quite helpful. Teachers really, we are in some schools that are 100% ELLs. And the glossaries are very helpful for those teachers and students.
And last but not least, we also have a built-in help function that, if you have any sort of challenges or you have questions to ask, we've got something built in that provides you type a question in, and there's some automated responses that are generated, but we also have the ability to ask a support staff if you don't find your answer right away, and we get back to you pretty quickly. So, and that's all built in within the system. All right, I think that concludes my demo. Janice, I'm going to turn it back to you. I'll keep my screen share on. I don't think you have any more slides to present, so I'll let you wrap up, and then we can open it up to questions. If anybody wants to see anything, I'll leave my screen open. That way I can navigate to something in case it's needed.
Great. Thanks, Mike. Thanks. Great job, like usual. So we designed this system because the National Science Foundation and the U.S. Department of Education, by whom we've been funded for many, many years, wanted a scalable solution to teachers' assessment and students' learning of the science practices that are more authentic. And so what we did was we operationalized or broke down the practices into their constituent parts using the literature from science education and students' difficulties. So those are kind of actionable bits that we know where students are floundering, and where teachers can help students at this very actionable level about what's problematic with their inquiry. For example, changing too many variables at once, not interpreting the correct column on the data, not varying the right variable, using two dependent variables in a question as opposed to an independent and dependent variable, for example. And it's quite rich. For example, Helen, you might be interested to know that the work on the claim evidence reasoning, for example, when we ask students to write about their evidence, what we auto score is whether their evidence is sufficient. That is, have they described trials that contrast? And are these sources of evidence that they're writing about, are they appropriate? Are they appropriate to the question that's being asked? And are they appropriate in terms of varying the right variable and keeping the rest the same? So we were able to develop the NLP algorithms that score these aspects of evidence that were found in the literature to be important by Bill Sandoval and his former student, Kelly Millwood. So we really combed the literature. As you know, I've been a learning scientist my entire career, and combed the literature for these very rich and nuanced examples of where students flounder. And then we built the system starting with a physical ramp, a physical apparatus, watching kids and asking them questions and having them do think alouds. And we have a very nice book chapter, a very well-received book chapter on that, working with kids one-on-one. And every aspect of our system has been built with teachers and students, working with them one-on-one, getting their feedback. For example, when I used to be at WPI in Massachusetts, which is where I met Mike and Cam, and we started the company together, we had children from a after-school program called Friendly House in Worcester. And some of these children are actually homeless, and they came to us usually every other week. And we would work with them one-on-one. And many of our scaffolds, et cetera, and our activities are built with these students one-on-one. So we're really proud of that aspect of our work. So on that note, I'd like to open it up to questions that you might have. Joey, do you have any comments that you want to add? You've Success Academy's been using Inq-ITS for a few years now, and they're going to continue in the future. Is there anything that you would like to add?
Yeah, I mean, from someone who is managing K-12 science across, we have 52 schools now. I think that this has been one of the easiest rollouts we've done of a platform. We did do a short pilot, just so everyone knows, and then we rolled it out to, I think, 17-ish middle schools that we have in our system. And we just reviewed data yesterday, but we saw around, I think, 40% increase from the beginning of the year to the end. And I think, in being quite transparent, we did some heavy professional development in the beginning. And then, of course, we have some short ones across the year. But I would say with bang for our buck, as far as time commitment and what the kids get out of it and the implementation from a teacher perspective, we've gotten sort of a lot out of it, I think, from everyone that's on the call. So even if you're an individual teacher or someone who's working with many, I do think the investment doesn't require as much as you would think, but the payoff is quite large. And I think that's what anybody's looking for. I think in an online platform at this day and age is getting more out of less and working smarter and not necessarily harder, as cliche as that sounds. And I think this sort of meets that bullet point.
Great.
It's really all I was saying. Yeah.
So are there any questions? Caitlin, are you fielding questions?
Yeah, I don't see any questions. So if you have a question, does anyone, please just type in the chat, literally about anything. If it's anything that Mike went over, if you just about implementation, any questions for Joey, since he's been there, done that.
I will add, in the age of, questions or turbulence in the way that we are in school or out of school, if this is like planned and you use it and it's in the system and the kids know how to use it, them doing it at home is so simple. You're not having to rework a lot of stuff. You can do it in school, out of school. They're absent, they are present. It's sort of a really good buffer for a multitude of stopgaps to sort of close learning gaps that you might see in kids as well. I think individually, I think I would add that. And for those of you that need big buckets of data, I mean, we just, we've been tracking that all year and it's been really simple in general. So I think I would add those 2 points for everybody.
Yeah, I always love hearing how teachers use it, because so many teachers use it so differently. So it's always interesting to see how different teachers use it.
That's a great example, a great thing to say, Caitlin. I want to pick up on that example. We work a fair amount in Kentucky, and they were a lead state on the next generation science standards. And we have one teacher there who won Kentucky Science Teacher of the Year a couple of years ago. Her name's Angela Marksbury, and she uses Ink Blotter in an extremely clever way, which is she has a lot of special ed students and students on IEPs. And we have those tips that Mike demoed for you, those 4 different tips. And they vary in terms of the kind of information they give. And one example is a conceptual hint, like, oh, looking at your data, how will you know about the effects of X on Y, for example, if students have changed too many variables across trials. So Angela does with a high flying student, she might use a conceptual hint because she wants the student to generate the idea on their own if she feels that they're capable of doing so based on where they are, then she'll give that conceptual hint. However, if a student she knows frustrates easily, what she might do is give the instrumental hint, which is really the sort of the most directed hint we have. And what she'll do is then say to the student, how is this different from what you did before? And how will this get you the data that you need? And so it reifies in the student's mind what that strategy is. And, you know, as we know, that's what students store in memory are these little nuggets that they reify in long-term memory. So teachers have been, you know, wonderfully creative with our technology. And what we want to do is make your job easier. We want to give you robust, very rigorous data, give you a technology that's beautifully designed by our partner CAM, with a beautiful, very usable interface that is very user-friendly, and know your students' performance so that you can decide on the fly. If Blotter says 80% of my kids are not forming a testable hypothesis, well, you can't get to 80% of your kids. You need to stop the class in real time. And so this feature of Inq Blotter is really changed teachers' lives with respect to the NGSS instruction in real time. We have a lot of data from COVID where teachers would use this synchronously with students who were working at home and say, okay, everybody log on at 10 o'clock in the morning, and I'm going to monitor you in real time. And teachers were using our technology in such clever ways. They would pull students into individual breakout rooms aligned by practice. So a question formation breakout room, a data collection breakout room, for example, a claim evidence reasoning breakout room. And then she could just flexibly move kids into these breakout rooms and do small group instruction, differentiated instruction. It's absolutely brilliant, the ways that teachers have used our technology. And, that's why we're in this business, is to give you the data, and give you the technology and let you do the things that you'd like to do, which is teach, rather than, onerously grade lab reports. I had one teacher say, you saved my marriage, because my husband was complaining that all I was doing is creating lab reports all the time. So, happy to do that as well. Let's see, what else can we tell you? We had really nice performance during COVID. We're now in 50 states in 13 countries. 1.5 million labs have been done. So students have been really working hard in Ngss, and we see really wonderful growth and very robust transfer to new content areas over long periods of time. So the way that I feel about this is that if we're able to teach students at the practice level how to conduct inquiry, and that can transfer to a new content area. Yeah, and we have demonstrated for the National Science Foundation how this transfers across content areas and across long periods of time. We've taught them something very significant, and we've been able to do this in a platform that is nuanced at the subcomponent level and scalable. So that's how we've been able to roll this out to 50 states and 12 countries. So we're really excited about the progress that we've made, and very excited about teachers' evaluations of the product.
I see that Mike is answering a few questions in the chat.
Yes.
Is there any other questions about implementation, about alerts, grading, you name it? We hopefully have an answer for you. Don't seem like it. Unless, Mike, if you want to verbally go over some of the lab suites.
This is a good question. This is a really good question asked by Shahida. Is asking about do the Inq-ITS labs. She said I used them during the pandemic and liked it a lot, and I say thank you very much for that. But had a question about does our system cover the full complement of NGSS assessment? And I want to say that the labs that we develop are meant to hit multiple practices at the same time for particular content areas. And it is not all of the performance expectations lend themselves to that kind of rich integration of all the practices at the same time. So I would say that we have a strong alignment with NGSS, but it is not currently 100% full coverage. And I think, but we are working towards more and more coverage. And part of the reason is that in our design philosophy too, we don't think that we should just be, doing a simple, answer this multiple choice question about a graph for this particular content area and we'll call it a day, right? We really want to have some rich integration between the practices and the content. So that kind of goes in part of our design philosophy.
Right. And the other point is that we wanted to be authentic in our usage of simulations. And so where it's authentic to do an end-to-end inquiry set of tasks like this that are authentic to inquiry, we do so. For example, there's a lot of work in a lot of domains or content areas in life science that are more categorical, where students are learning about animate versus inanimate, et cetera. And it wouldn't necessarily lend itself, that content doesn't lend itself well to a simulation environment. So we really focused on the areas of science that lend themselves well to simulation in authentic ways.
Like Mike said, we're always coming out with new labs too. I think Brett made a joke the other day that sometimes he can't keep up.
Yes. All right. So I think our webinar ends at 4:30, correct?
Correct.
Yes.
Okay.
And,
so if that's the case, then I just want to highlight real quick that if you go to Inq-ITS.com and you click on, you can sign up, and as simple as that, you can get going right away, create a teacher account, and you can immediately start assigning labs to your students. We offer a free trial that lets you assign one content area and a couple of the free general inquiry labs. So you can get going and try this with your students right away and get access to all the features, recs. You can get access to reports and access to the alerting platform.
And we also did have a question about cost quotes. So if you go back to that main page that Mike was just at, on just Inq-ITS.com and just click purchase, you can fill out the information and Brett or I will get in contact with you. Yes. Any other questions?
Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Yeah, Brett. Hi.
Hey, I just wanted to see if Joey could stay on the line briefly with 4 of us.
The team, absolutely. Excellent.
All right.
Well, thank you so much for your attention and joining us today. This is really exciting to roll this out to so many teachers and students. And thank you so much. And please let us know if you have any questions whatsoever.
Thanks everybody for coming.
Thank you.
And any questions, please feel free to reach out. We can help you onboard if you need any help onboarding. And yeah, we're here to help.
Right.
Take care.
Okay.